Viewer Neon Glitch sent me a long comment on one of my videos about random encounters or wandering creatures. It's too long a comment to read, but I very much appreciate the comment. Thanks, Neon Glitch. In that comment, they referenced a Bob the World Builder video on random encounters, so I gave it a watch. And what was interesting was there's some decent advice. It's not a terrible video, but there were some preconceptions that I think Bob World Builder was bringing to their discussion of wandering creature checks or random encounters that was a little bit misplaced. So I thought I would go over a couple things to hopefully help some folks out. And I guess I would call these maybe 4 if we're going to use a number, because I don't know, YouTube, the algorithm loves numbers. Four ways to really improve your wandering creature or random encounter checks. The first one is create a table of encounters or wandering creatures and be intentional with that table. In Bob the World Builder's video, he creates a table of encounters for a dungeon, and he's explaining the monsters he's putting onto the list as he's going along, but as he's building it, he's maybe only putting about a third of the encounters on there that actually fit the context of the place. And the other things he's throwing in there, he says something like, well, I like these guys, so I toss them in there. Do better than that, because the next thing he talks about is how when he starts rolling results on the table, many of them don't match the context of the place where these encounters will take place. And of course they won't. Only a third or less of the encounters on the table match the place. So yes, if you have 10 encounters and 3 of them are location specific and the rest are generic, would you be surprised if you rolled up a bunch of generic results? No. But you created the table yourself, so you don't have to settle for generic encounters on that table. If you have an idea of what creatures or encounters really fit the area that you're designing this table for, put them in the table. And just because you like something doesn't need to be everywhere. If you can't figure out why there might be an abundance of this type of encounter in the place, don't put it in the table. And if you don't do that, that saves a lot of the problems that he tries to then resolve later on could have been resolved simply by making a better table. So be intentional with the wandering creature tables that you make. Then you won't be surprised, or you won't get any generic results. You will get results that fit the spot. And that's really the point. You want everything to fit in some way. It doesn't all have to be of a single type, but you want everything to make sense. And remember, you're creating these tables, so there's no excuse not to customize them to as much as you need to for the place that these encounters are taking place in. The second one, they don't have to be static. The list, and I mean I should say it, your wandering creature list table does not need to be static. For example, in Bob World Builder's list, he has 2 entries, one for a ghostly noise and then for a ghost, which means that you could be rolling up ghostly noises a bunch of times. You could be rolling a ghost a bunch of times, but that doesn't have to be that way. What you could do instead is say, hey, ghostly presence is 1 entry on your table. And the first time you roll it, you get noises. The second time you roll it, you get the ghost. And if the ghost has been resolved, then the third time you roll it, you don't need to get either one of those. You can either get nothing, or you can add something else from your list. Either one of the entries just fills in both spots, or you can even add in something from an additional list. The point is that the idea of the ghost or encountering some sort of trace of the ghost or aspect of the ghost can only take up 1 spot on your table. You don't need to fill it with 3 things. 1, hearing the ghost, 2, seeing the ghost from a distance, and then 3, encountering the ghost itself. That can all be 1 thing. You could just check off which element you're getting, and then when you're done, replace it with something else or remove it from the list. Some combination. The point is that it doesn't have to be a static thing, as in once you've created it, it's stuck in stone and can never be changed. Modulate that table as much as you need to as you're going through the dungeon. Make a list of monsters that's actually bigger than your random encounter list. Then when you have something unique on your list and it's dealt with, you can remove the unique thing, you can add a new thing on the list. Or if you want to simulate that the dungeon is, or this whatever this dangerous space is being emptied, then you can simply have a blank. And if the blank comes up, then the party lucked out. That would have been when Oscar the Troll shows up, but Oscar the Troll has already been defeated, so guess what? Nothing. The third thing to understand is that your wandering creatures, both the table and then, of course, how that becomes part of the game in terms of when you're rolling on it, it doesn't occur in a vacuum. When Bob Worldbuilder was going over his procedure, he started rattling off the results of rolling on the table as if that's the only thing going on. Oh, look, I got ghost, sound, ghost, trap. That doesn't fit what I want to do. Therefore, I need to modulate what I'm doing. But that's not really an accurate representation of how they'll work in the game. Remember, if you're going by the book, and of course that book's going to vary, usually you're only rolling for wandering encounters once every 3, 4, 5 turns. And then there's all the rest of the dungeon stuff that's going on. So the reality is, even if your wandering encounter checks ended up being ghost, ghost, trap, or say ghost, trap, ghost, remember that the first time they're doing the ghost is going to be after they may have fought goblins, been down a trapped hallway, encountered a troll, ran away from some gnolls, and then they get the ghost. And then they go through a bunch more stuff, go down a staircase, deal with some animated armor, open up a locked door. Oh, then they got the trap. And then they go through a trapped armory. And then they might defeat some kind of mini boss. Then they get the ghost again. Right? The idea here is that these encounters are spread out. When you read them all in a row, it may sound repetitive, but remember, in the game, you're not reading them in a row. Generally speaking, anyway, you're going to be interspersing them through all the stuff that's already happening in your dungeon. So the way that reads to you is just looking at in a vacuum is not the way that will turn out. And so it might be a mistake to look at and say, oh, I got the same result 3 times. I need to change how I'm doing things. Maybe, or you could look at it and say, hey, in the context of the dungeon, this stuff's going to be mixed in with all the other stuff's going on in the dungeon. It is not going to appear to the players as we're playing as a table as being 3 things in a row. It's going to be scattered amongst all the other things that are going on. And the fourth one, and I guess the last one, is you don't need multiple dice or fancy ways of creating, or you don't need multiple dice or dice pools or any kind of fancy exploding dice or any of these fancy kind of dice mechanics to modulate probabilities. And more than that, flat probabilities might actually be preferable than when you start adding curves. Bob Worldbuilder used the second half of his video to talk about making a bell curve. With 2d6, it's not technically a bell curve, but close enough. Basically creating a hump in your probabilities so that you're more likely to get the center and less likely to get the numbers, the results that are out on the fringes. And then you can use that to make sure that the stuff you want to be more common is in fact more common. But as I've just gone through, he was looking at it like your results are happening in a vacuum so that you're getting things all over the place that maybe don't make sense together. But remember, we're not getting them together. The other thing to keep in mind is that you may actually want a flat probability because you want different elements to show up. If I put goblins in the center of my probability arc, I'm going to get goblins a lot. And if the dungeon already has goblins in it, then I'm going to end up with goblins in the room, goblin wandering creatures, goblins in a room, goblin wandering creatures. You might actually be lessening the amount of diversity in your dungeon because you've put the most common things in the center. Whereas in fact, you may want to have a flat probability so that there is an even chance of maybe goblins or the ghost or a trap or the dragon to shake things up. Because remember, these wandering creature checks aren't going to be happening all the time. They're going to be periodical. And so you might want something different than the norm. So in fact, you might actually not want or even find it profitable to add that curve to your probability. If you do want to add a curve though, sure, you can roll multiple dice. If you go to a website called anydice.com, I think you can put in different dice types and rolling types. You can see what the probabilities are for all that stuff. But you should also do something that's really easy, which is just add a result to multiple faces of the dice. If you're rolling, say, a d20, for each face of the die, that's 5%. So if I put goblins on the number 1 out of 20, I know there's a 5% chance of goblins. If I want to modulate that probability and make it 10% goblins, all I do is say now it's goblins on a result of 1 or 2. Hey, maybe we want 15% goblins. Then it's just 1, 2, and 3 are goblins, and I'm done. I don't need to go and complicate things. Now, if you want to, great. And there are some really fun things you could do with different dice. And I'm not meaning to suggest you couldn't do all those things, but it's, to me anyway, a lot easier to comprehend and figure out the odds with something simple. If you're using a 10-sided dice, it's 10% per face. So if I want to give a 20% chance of something, I just put it on 2 faces of the dice, 1 and 2, 8, 9, 9 and 10, so on and so forth. On a D6, it's 16.66666. It's a little bit iffy, but you get the idea there. And you can use just that kind of put the same result on multiple faces, and you can create curves of probability without having to use multiple dice. But I get it. Multiple dice are fun. I love multiple dice, but it might be easier to wrap your brain around. And certainly you can go down those rabbit holes on any dice. Goodness knows I have, and find all that stuff. But you can just do it with an easy dice, particularly the larger dice, the D20, D10, give you more variability. And of course, you can just go to rolling a percentile or D100, and then you can just, if you want something to have a 10% chance, you make it on 1 to 10, 90 to 100, whatever. It's very easy to suss out as a GM. One thing, as much as I love all kinds of different dice mechanics, when I'm trying to figure out what the odds are of different things, oftentimes it can be very difficult when we're doing all kinds of crazy exploding dice or advantage, disadvantage, and all those things, those variables come in. You're just doing a straight percentile or just a straight D20, D10, D6, whatever, much easier to figure out which is important to me. I'll link to Bob Worldbuilder's video because I think it is a good one, but I did feel like, as Neon Glitch kind of said in his very long comment, alluded to, and well, no, he said it pretty plainly, that he felt like there was some issues with how Bob Worldbuilder approached the problem. In a sense, he created the problem that he was then trying to solve. And I do agree with that. A lot of it comes down to, hey, if you just create the right table, then you won't need all those modulations and changes and doing all the stuff you do later. So be intentional with your tables. Remember, they don't have to be static. Change them, update them, modulate them, do what you need to do. Understand that your tables, that your encounters will not exist in a vacuum. They're going to be part and parcel of and a totality of your party's interactions with the space. Much of that is going to be outside those tables. So if you're rolling your wandering creatures in advance, which is a good idea, don't just look at them as they exist on the page. Think about how and when they're going to enter into play in different parts of the experience of the dungeon. And remember, it's great to mess around with dice and things like that, but you can do things very quickly and very easily just by adding multiple faces of dice to a single result, and then you can modulate probabilities if you need to. But I think sometimes that a flat probability is actually a little bit underrated, because often what we want out of the wandering creatures is a diversity that we might not get in the dungeon. If we're in the goblin's lair, we expect most of the set encounters to be goblins and goblin related. Therefore, it might be nice with the wandering creature table to get a bunch of different stuff and not more goblins, even if that maybe logically, in a simulation sense, makes the most sense. I hope this was helpful. Thanks again, Neon Glitch, for the comment. Game on, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye now.